The cruelest seats at a wedding are never in the back. They're the ones everyone can see. Scarlett Hayes stood at the entrance of the Grand Wellington Hotel with her fingers wrapped around a cream-colored invitation that already felt heavier than it should have. Rain shimmered across the black marble driveway, while luxury cars lined the curb under golden lights. Through the glass walls of the ballroom, she could see crystal chandeliers glowing above hundreds of guests dressed in silk and tuxedos. Somewhere inside, Daniel Brooks was about to marry the woman he cheated on her with. A valet reached for Scarlett's coat, but she quietly shook her head. The cold air helped her breathe. 2 years ago, she had walked into the same hotel beside Daniel, while cameras flashed like fireworks around them. Back then, people called them perfect. Tonight, the whispers sounded different. That's his ex-wife. I heard he left her with almost nothing. Why would she even come? Scarlett heard every word as she stepped onto the polished floor in black heels. Her dark coat wrapped tightly around her red satin dress hidden underneath. The ballroom smelled like champagne, roses, and expensive perfume. A string quartet played softly near the stage while waiters carried silver trays through the crowd. Then Scarlett noticed her seat. Table 19, near the kitchen entrance. Half hidden beside swinging service doors where staff disappeared carrying dirty plates. She stared at the little white name card for 3 long seconds before letting out the smallest smile. Daniel had planned this carefully. Not enough to openly insult her. Just enough for everyone to notice. Across the room, Vanessa Cole laughed loudly beside bridesmaids in pale gold dresses. Her diamond ring sparkled every time she lifted her champagne glass. Daniel stood near the stage greeting business partners with the polished smile Scarlett used to help him practice in the mirror before networking events. He looked confident, victorious, like a man who believed the hardest part of his life was already behind him. Then his eyes found Scarlett. The smile on his face disappeared for half a heartbeat. It came back quickly, but not fast enough. Scarlett saw it. So did Vanessa. The bride leaned closer to Daniel and whispered something sharp into his ear before looking directly at Scarlett with a smile too sweet to be sincere. Scarlett calmly removed her coat. The room changed instantly. Conversation slowed. Heads turned one after another like dominoes falling in silence. The red satin dress caught the chandelier light with every step she took toward table 19. Elegant, untouchable, not the broken woman people expected to see. Even the violinist seemed quieter. Daniel stared at her as if he were seeing someone unfamiliar wearing the face of a woman he once loved. Scarlett sat down beside the kitchen doors without a word. A waiter accidentally stopped walking just to look at her. Somewhere near the bar, someone dropped a fork onto a plate. Vanessa's smile began to stiffen. Scarlett reached for her water glass slowly, gracefully, like she belonged in the center of the ballroom instead of hidden near the service hall. And for the first time that night, Daniel looked nervous. People only notice your sacrifices after they lose access to them. Scarlett kept her eyes on the water glass in front of her while conversations slowly returned around the ballroom. The musicians began playing again, softer this time, but the tension in the room had already changed shape. She could feel people looking at her between sips of champagne and quiet gossip. Not with pity anymore, with curiosity. Daniel stood near the stage pretending to laugh at something one of his partners said, but every few seconds his attention drifted back toward table 19. Scarlett noticed it without looking directly at him. She had spent 8 years learning Daniel Brooks better than anyone in the room. She knew the difference between his confident smile and the tight one he wore when something slipped beyond his control. Vanessa noticed too. The bride wrapped her hand possessively around Daniel's arm, while photographers circled them beneath the chandelier. Camera flashes reflected against the diamonds around her neck. Scarlett remembered helping Daniel choose those photographers years ago for another event, back when they were still building a future together instead of destroying one. Strange how memory worked. Sometimes heartbreak returned through tiny details instead of dramatic moments. The scent of his cologne passing too close in a hallway. The sound of cufflinks hitting marble. The way he adjusted his tie before speaking to wealthy clients. Once, those things made Scarlett feel safe. Now they only reminded her how long she had ignored the truth. 2 years earlier, Daniel had walked into their apartment carrying takeout from Scarlett's favorite Italian place on West 72nd Street. It was snowing outside. Scarlett remembered because melted snow still clung to the shoulders of his charcoal coat. when he said the words that quietly split her life in half. I think we both know this marriage is not working anymore. He said it gently, almost professionally, like a lawyer delivering prepared statements. Scarlett had stared at the steam rising from the pasta containers while her chest slowly hollowed out. She asked if there was someone else. Daniel paused for exactly 2 seconds before saying Vanessa's name. That pause hurt more than the confession itself. It meant he had rehearsed honesty carefully enough to make himself look decent. In the weeks that followed, everyone expected Scarlett to fight for the penthouse, the accounts, the vacation house in Connecticut. Instead, she signed the divorce papers quietly in a conference room that smelled like coffee and printer ink. Daniel looked surprised the entire time. He kept waiting for anger, tears, negotiation. But Scarlett only removed her wedding ring afterward and placed it on the polished table between them. Daniel never realized she sold that ring 6 months later to pay the deposit on a tiny studio apartment overlooking the Hudson River. He never knew she spent nights eating instant soup beside unpacked boxes while teaching herself how to rebuild a life from nothing. And he definitely never imagined she would someday walk back into his world looking stronger than she had during their marriage. Across the ballroom, Vanessa suddenly began walking toward table 19 in silver heels and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Several guests immediately fell silent. Scarlett slowly lifted her eyes from the water glass just as Vanessa stopped beside her chair and said, "I honestly did not think you would be brave enough to come tonight." Some people confuse kindness with weakness until the moment kindness disappears. The entire table fell silent after Vanessa spoke. Even the waiter pouring sparkling water hesitated before slowly stepping away. Scarlett looked up calmly, the chandelier light reflecting softly against the satin of her dress. Vanessa stood there smiling with the kind of confidence that only existed when surrounded by an audience. Her engagement ring flashed every time she crossed her arms. Scarlett noticed how tightly she held herself together beneath the designer gown and perfect makeup. People who truly felt secure did not need public victories this badly. Scarlett lifted her glass carefully before answering. "I was invited." Her voice remained smooth and quiet, almost gentle. Vanessa laughed softly, but it sounded forced around the edges. "Daniel said you probably would not come. Honestly, I told him maybe it would be too emotional for you." Nearby guests pretended not to listen while hearing every word. Scarlett could feel their attention hanging in the air like smoke. Vanessa leaned slightly closer. "Still, I guess closure looks different for everyone." Scarlett held her gaze for a long moment without blinking. Then she smiled. Not bitterly, not sadly, calmly. "You are right," she said. "It does." Something shifted in Vanessa's expression after that. Just a flicker, small enough that nobody else would notice. But Scarlett did, because once upon a time, she had mastered the same social performances herself. The polished smile, the controlled tone, the desperate need to appear chosen. Across the ballroom, Daniel finally began walking toward them. His tuxedo fit perfectly, tailored within an inch of arrogance, but his face carried tension now. Scarlett remembered when she used to fix his cuffs before charity galas. Back then, he would kiss her forehead and promise they were building a future together. Strange how lies sounded truthful when spoken repeatedly. "In expensive places. Everything okay over here?" Daniel asked as he reached the table. Vanessa immediately looped her arm through his. "Of course," she answered sweetly. "I was just making sure Scarlett felt welcome." Scarlett almost smiled at the irony. Daniel avoided looking directly at her for more than a second at a time. That alone told her everything. Guilt always made him restless. "You look," Daniel paused carefully. "Different." Scarlett tilted her head slightly. People usually do after 2 years. A few guests nearby exchanged glances. Vanessa's smile tightened again. Daniel cleared his throat and adjusted his watch. "I am glad you came," he said, though he sounded uncertain whether he meant it. Scarlett noticed his eyes drifting toward the empty seat beside her. He was checking if she came alone. That realization almost made her laugh. Even now, part of Daniel still needed reassurance that she had not truly moved on. The wedding coordinator suddenly rushed across the ballroom carrying a tablet and whispering anxiously into an earpiece. Staff members near the entrance began straightening themselves quickly. One valet nearly jogged past the glass doors outside. The atmosphere shifted with strange suddenness. Important. Anticipatory. Daniel frowned toward the entrance. "What is going on?" he muttered. No one answered him. Then Scarlett noticed it too. The staff were not reacting to the wedding. They were preparing for someone else. A black luxury sedan slowly pulled beneath the hotel awning outside, its headlights glowing through the rain-streaked glass. And for the first time all evening, Scarlett's heartbeat changed. The strongest people in the room are usually the quietest ones. Rain slid slowly down the glass walls of the ballroom, while every staff member near the entrance suddenly straightened their posture. The hotel manager adjusted his tie so quickly that his hands nearly shook. Two security guards moved discreetly toward the front doors. Even the wedding coordinator lowered her voice into something more careful and respectful. Daniel frowned beside Vanessa, confused by the sudden shift in energy. Who are they waiting for? Vanessa whispered, but nobody answered her. Scarlett already knew. She kept her hands folded calmly in her lap, while the black sedan outside came to a smooth stop beneath the golden awning. The driver stepped out first, opening an umbrella against the rain before walking toward the rear passenger door. Around the ballroom, conversations faded again one table at a time. Scarlett could almost hear Daniel's heartbeat from across the room. Then the door opened. Adrian Kensington stepped out wearing a black tailored coat over a dark charcoal suit that looked effortlessly expensive without trying to impress anyone. Tall, composed, the kind of presence that changed a room before he even entered it. Rain glimmered briefly against his shoulders as hotel staff immediately rushed forward. Mr. Kensington, the manager greeted carefully. We were not informed you would be arriving tonight. Adrian gave a polite nod while handing his coat to the valet. Last-minute schedule change, he answered calmly. His voice carried the relaxed confidence of someone who never needed to raise it. Inside the ballroom, Daniel's face slowly lost color. Scarlett saw recognition hit him almost painfully. Vanessa looked between them in confusion. Who is that? She whispered again. This time Daniel answered under his breath. Adrian Kensington. The name moved through the ballroom faster than music. Guests began murmuring immediately. Several executives near the stage stood straighter. One older investor nearly abandoned his drink, trying to approach the entrance first. Adrian Kensington was not simply wealthy. He owned Kensington International, the luxury hospitality empire behind half the five-star properties on the East Coast. Hotels, resorts, private clubs, real estate. Daniel's law firm had spent the last 6 months desperately trying to secure a partnership with one of Adrian's expansion projects in Manhattan. And until this moment, Daniel believed tonight was supposed to be the most important event in the room. Adrian entered quietly beneath the crystal lights while conversations collapsed into whispers around him. He acknowledged a few people with brief nods, but never stopped walking completely. Scarlett remained seated near the kitchen entrance, calm and motionless, though her pulse had begun to soften in a way it had not all evening. Daniel instinctively adjusted his tuxedo jacket before stepping forward. Mr. Kensington, he called carefully, forcing confidence into his tone. Adrian turned politely. His eyes landed briefly on Daniel. Professional, controlled. Then something changed the instant his gaze shifted past him toward table 19. Toward Scarlett. For the first time all night, warmth touched Adrian's expression. Small, barely visible, but real. And Daniel noticed it immediately. So did Vanessa. The ballroom seemed to pause around them as Adrian walked directly across the marble floor toward the woman seated beside the service doors. Guests turned in silence, watching one of the most powerful men in the city ignore the center of the wedding entirely just to stop beside Scarlett Hayes. Then Adrian offered his hand to her gently and said, I was hoping you had not left yet. Nothing unsettles people more than seeing someone they thought they destroyed standing peacefully in front of them. The ballroom had become so quiet that Scarlett could hear the soft crackle of candle flames near the stage. Adrian Kensington stood beside her chair with one hand extended calmly toward her, completely unaware or entirely unconcerned that half the room was staring at him. Scarlett looked up at him slowly, and for the first time that evening, something warm touched her expression. Real warmth. Not performance. Not survival. Just recognition. She placed her hand in his, and Adrian helped her rise with quiet ease. The movement itself was simple, but the reaction around them was not. Daniel's jaw tightened almost immediately. Vanessa blinked in visible confusion while guests exchanged whispers that grew louder by the second. Scarlett noticed how several executives near the bar suddenly looked at her differently now. Respect moved through wealthy rooms quickly once power entered the conversation. Adrian glanced briefly toward the empty champagne glass on Scarlett's table before looking back at her. "You disappeared before dessert at the charity gala last month," he said casually. "I still owe you a dance." Scarlett smiled faintly. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything that matters." The answer landed softly, but Daniel heard every word. Scarlett could feel it. Adrian finally turned toward him with polite professionalism. "Daniel Brooks," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Congratulations on the wedding." Daniel forced a smile while shaking his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Kensington. I did not realize you knew Scarlett." Adrian's expression remained unreadable. "We have known each other for a while." Vanessa stepped closer immediately, eager to recover control of the conversation. "Scarlett never mentioned that she had friends in your circle," she said lightly. Scarlett almost laughed at the wording. "Friends in your circle," as if worth could only exist when validated by wealth. Adrian looked toward Vanessa politely, though there was distance in his eyes. "Scarlett does not talk much about herself," he answered. "That is probably why most people underestimate her." Silence followed. Heavy. Beautiful. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks again, a nervous habit Scarlett used to notice during difficult negotiations. The irony almost hurt. Years ago, Daniel had once told her she was too quiet to survive around powerful people. Too soft. Too emotional. Yet here she stood, while one of the most influential men in Manhattan treated her like the only person in the room worth noticing. Nearby guests slowly pretended to return to their conversations, but nobody truly stopped watching. Scarlett noticed two women near the dance floor whispering while looking directly at her red dress. A man beside the stage subtly searched Adrian Kensington on his phone beneath the tablecloth. Vanessa's smile weakened further every passing second. Then Daniel asked the question carefully, trying to sound casual even though tension already sat visibly in his shoulders. "So how exactly did you two meet?" Adrian glanced toward Scarlett before answering. 3 months ago, at the Kensington Harbor Hotel in Montauk." Scarlett remembered the morning instantly. Ocean fog drifting across the coastline. The smell of fresh coffee inside the lobby. Her hair tied back while she helped calm an angry guest after a reservation system crashed during Memorial Day weekend. Adrian had stood quietly near the front desk in a navy sweater and baseball cap while everyone else panicked around him. She had no idea who he was back then. To Scarlett, he was just another exhausted guest holding black coffee at 7:30 in the morning. And somehow, that made the memory even more dangerous for Daniel. The people who save your life rarely look heroic the first time you meet them. Scarlett could still remember the sound of rain against the windows of the Kensington Harbor Hotel that morning in Montauk. The lobby had been chaos. Memorial Day weekend travelers filled every corner of the property, while a reservation system failure left dozens of guests angry and exhausted after hours on the road. Phones rang nonstop behind the front desk. Someone complained about missing luggage. A child cried near the elevators. One employee was already on the verge of tears. Scarlett had only worked at the hotel for 4 months back then, but somehow everyone still looked toward her whenever things started falling apart. She stood behind the marble counter in a simple cream blouse with her hair tied back loosely, typing reservation confirmations manually while calming frustrated guests one by one. "I understand," she told an older couple patiently. "Give me 5 minutes, and I will personally make sure your suite is ready." Her voice never rose. That was what Adrian noticed first. Not beauty, not charm, control. Most people became louder when pressure arrived. Scarlett became quieter. Adrian had been standing near the lobby cafe holding black coffee in one hand while watching the entire situation unfold. No security team around him. No announcement of who he was. Just another guest in dark jeans and a navy sweater. At one point, a businessman slammed his room key onto the counter and snapped impatiently, "Do you people even know what you are doing?" Several employees froze instantly. Scarlett simply looked at him calmly and replied, "We do, sir. And I promise yelling will not make your ocean view arrive any faster." A few nearby guests laughed softly. Even the angry man looked embarrassed afterward. Adrian smiled into his coffee for the first time that morning. 30 minutes later, Scarlett stepped outside through the side employee entrance for air. The ocean wind smelled like salt and rain while gray waves crashed against the rocks beyond the parking lot. She leaned briefly against the wall and closed her eyes, exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. You handled that better than most executives I know. Scarlett opened her eyes and saw Adrian standing a few feet away beneath the awning. She gave a tired smile. I almost threw a reservation tablet through the window. But you did not. I need the job too much. Adrian studied her quietly for a moment. No, he said softly. You just understand dignity. The sentence stayed with Scarlett long after that morning ended. Over the following weeks, Adrian returned to the hotel several times. Sometimes for meetings. Sometimes for reasons Scarlett quietly suspected had nothing to do with business anymore. He would sit near the windows with coffee while she worked. He noticed things other people ignored. The way Scarlett remembered every employee's birthday. The way she slipped extra food vouchers to struggling families without asking permission. The way sadness occasionally crossed her face when she thought nobody was watching. Adrian never pushed for answers. That was part of what made him different. One evening after her shift ended, Scarlett admitted she had once been married. Adrian looked out toward the dark ocean before asking only one question. Did he make you feel small? Scarlett stared at him in silence, because somehow that single sentence had reached deeper than every apology Daniel ever gave her. Back inside the ballroom, Daniel's expression tightened while Adrian calmly stood beside Scarlett as though he had always belonged there. And for the first time since the divorce, Scarlett realized something terrifying. Daniel had not ruined her life. He had only removed himself from the version that was finally beginning. The moment someone realizes they lost you is usually the moment you stop wanting them back. Daniel could not stop looking at Scarlett. It had become obvious now. Every time another guest approached him with congratulations, his attention drifted back toward the woman standing beside Adrian Kensington near table 19. Vanessa noticed it too. Her champagne smile had started cracking around the edges, especially each time Adrian spoke quietly to Scarlett, and she answered with genuine ease instead of careful politeness. That was what unsettled Daniel most. Scarlett used to speak cautiously around powerful men, always worried about saying the wrong thing, always glancing toward him before giving opinions at dinners and corporate events. But tonight she looked different, relaxed, certain, like someone who no longer needed permission to exist comfortably in expensive rooms. Adrian reached for a champagne flute from a passing tray and handed it to Scarlett first before taking one for himself. The gesture was small, almost invisible beneath the ballroom lights, but Daniel remembered doing that exact same thing for her years ago, back when she still looked at him like he was the center of her world. Mr. Kensington, one investor interrupted carefully, approaching with nervous enthusiasm. I heard rumors your company is acquiring new legal representation in Manhattan. Adrian nodded slightly. We finalized most of the transition this week. Daniel straightened immediately. Scarlett saw hope flash across his face before he could hide it. His firm had been competing for that contract for months. Millions of dollars depended on it. Reputation too. The investor smiled awkwardly. Then Brooks and Carter must be thrilled. Daniel's firm has been talking about this deal nonstop. Silence followed for one dangerous second too long. Adrian took a slow sip of champagne before answering. Actually, we moved in another direction. Daniel's expression froze. Vanessa looked sharply toward him. Around them, conversations softened again as nearby guests pretended not to listen while hearing every word. Adrian continued calmly, never sounding cruel. Kensington International signed with Whitmore Legal yesterday morning. Scarlett watched the color drain slowly from Daniel's face. Whitmore Legal was Brooks and Carter's largest competitor. Everyone in Manhattan knew that contract would change the balance between both firms overnight. Daniel forced a smile that looked painful around the corners. I was not aware the decision had already been made. Adrian studied him quietly. Your senior partners were informed this afternoon. Scarlett noticed Daniel's fingers tighten around his champagne glass. Suddenly his confidence looked expensive instead of real, like a tailored suit stitched over panic. Vanessa touched his arm lightly. Daniel? She whispered, but he barely reacted. Adrian turned toward Scarlett then, effortlessly shifting the energy away from business. You never answered my question, he said softly. Will you finally give me that dance tonight? Scarlett felt dozens of eyes move toward her instantly. The ballroom lights reflected gold against the marble floor while the string quartet transitioned into a slow piano arrangement near the stage. For a brief second, old memories brushed painfully across her chest. She remembered dancing with Daniel in this same hotel years earlier while believing love alone could protect a marriage from selfishness. She remembered shrinking herself slowly to fit inside his ambition, smiling through loneliness because she thought loyalty required silence. But standing beside Adrian felt different. There was no performance in it. No pressure to become smaller so someone else could feel larger. Scarlett looked toward Daniel one last time. He was staring at her now with something deeper than jealousy. Regret. Real regret. The dangerous kind that arrives too late to repair anything. Scarlett smiled gently before placing her champagne glass onto the nearest tray. Then she slipped her hand into Adrian's and walked with him toward the center of the ballroom, while Daniel watched the woman he once discarded become impossible to ignore. Sometimes the real heartbreak is realizing you were loyal to someone who only loved being admired. The music slowed into a soft piano melody while Adrian guided Scarlett onto the center of the ballroom floor. Crystal lights shimmered above them like reflections on water, and for the first time that evening, Scarlett no longer felt the need to hide herself inside silence. Adrian rested one hand gently at her waist while the other held hers with calm certainty. Nothing possessive, nothing performative, just steady, safe. Around them, conversations dissolved into whispers again. Guests who had once looked at Scarlett with sympathy were now watching her with fascination. Vanessa stood frozen beside the stage, gripping her champagne glass too tightly, while photographers awkwardly lowered their cameras, unsure whether they were still capturing a wedding or witnessing something far more interesting. Daniel remained near the head table, but his attention never left Scarlett. Not once. Adrian looked down at her quietly as they moved across the marble floor. "You are thinking too loudly again," he said softly. Scarlett let out the faintest laugh. "I forgot you can tell. Only because you look at chandeliers whenever you are trying not to feel something." Scarlett glanced upward instinctively, and Adrian smiled. The warmth in his expression almost hurt. 2 years ago, she would have mistaken this kind of gentleness for weakness because Daniel trained her to believe affection only mattered when attached to achievement. Every compliment from him came with conditions. Every celebration carried expectations. But Adrian noticed things without trying to own them. He saw her. That difference changed everything. Near the edge of the dance floor, Daniel finally stepped forward as though he could not tolerate the distance any longer. "Scarlett," he called carefully. Adrian stopped moving immediately, though his hand never left hers. Scarlett turned toward Daniel slowly. Up close, he suddenly looked older than she remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like ambition and ego had finally begun collecting interest. Daniel forced a tight smile. "Could I speak with you for a second?" Vanessa's face hardened instantly. "Daniel," she whispered sharply, but he ignored her completely. Scarlett noticed that too. Adrian glanced at her calmly. "Do you want me to stay?" The question mattered more than Daniel understood, because Adrian was asking instead of deciding for her. Scarlett met his eyes briefly, before answering. "No, it is okay." Adrian nodded once and stepped back without hesitation. The trust in that single movement nearly overwhelmed her. Daniel waited until Adrian moved several feet away before speaking again. "You look happy," he said quietly. Scarlett studied him for a moment. "I am." Daniel swallowed hard. "I never thought." He stopped himself. Scarlett could almost hear the unfinished sentence. "I never thought you would become someone I could lose." Around them, guests continued pretending not to watch. Vanessa stood stiff beside the wedding cake while 2 bridesmaids whispered nervously near the bar. Daniel lowered his voice further. "Did you know about the acquisition?" Scarlett blinked softly. "What acquisition?" Daniel stared at her carefully, searching for deception. "Adrian bought controlling shares of Brooks and Carter 3 weeks ago through Kensington Holdings." Scarlett said nothing. Daniel laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. "You really did not know." For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed his face completely naked. Scarlett slowly turned toward Adrian across the ballroom. He was speaking politely with investors now, composed as ever beneath the chandelier light. And suddenly she understood why every senior partner at Daniel's firm had been acting nervous for weeks. Adrian had the power to destroy Daniel's career if he wanted to, but he never mentioned it to her. Not once. Because unlike Daniel, Adrian never used power to make someone feel small. And somehow, that realization shattered Daniel more than revenge ever could. The best revenge is watching someone realize your absence became their punishment. Scarlett stood silently beneath the chandelier lights while Daniel struggled to process the truth sitting in front of him. Around them, laughter and music slowly returned across the ballroom, but something inside the night had permanently shifted. The wedding no longer felt like his victory. It felt like the moment he finally understood what he lost. Daniel looked toward Adrian again across the room. Powerful investors surrounded him now, waiting for attention, but Adrian remained calm and untouched by the noise around him. There was no arrogance in the way he carried influence. That difference alone made Daniel look smaller standing there in his own reception. He bought the firm, Daniel repeated quietly, almost to himself. Scarlett nodded once. Apparently, Daniel studied her face carefully, searching for satisfaction or cruelty. He found neither, and somehow that hurt more. You really did not know? He asked again. No, Scarlett's answer was honest. Daniel let out a slow breath and glanced toward the dance floor, where couples moved beneath soft golden light. He could ruin my career if he wanted to. Scarlett followed his gaze toward Adrian. But he will not. Daniel looked back at her immediately. How can you be so sure? Scarlett smiled faintly, sadness touching the edges of it. Because not everyone enjoys power the way you do. The words landed softly, but Daniel lowered his eyes like they weighed far more than anger ever could. Across the ballroom, Vanessa finally walked toward them in tense silver heels, her expression carefully controlled for the crowd still watching nearby. Daniel, people are waiting for the cake cutting, she said quietly, though her voice carried strain beneath it. Daniel barely reacted. Scarlett noticed the exact moment Vanessa understood she was losing something invisible. Not the marriage, the attention, the certainty. She glanced once toward Adrian and then back at Scarlett with growing insecurity. Scarlett almost pitied her. Almost. Vanessa had spent 2 years believing she won because she was chosen. But tonight proved something painful. Being chosen by a man capable of betrayal was never a prize. Scarlett reached into her small satin clutch and removed a cream-colored envelope. Daniel frowned slightly as she handed it to him. What is this? Scarlett's eyes softened. Something I should have returned a long time ago. Daniel slowly opened the envelope. Inside rested her old wedding ring. The same ring she had once left behind in the conference room after signing divorce papers. Daniel stared at it silently while the ballroom lights reflected against the diamond. Scarlett remembered how she used to twist that ring nervously during arguments, believing love meant enduring unhappiness quietly. Now it looked strangely small resting in his palm. I sold the engagement ring, she said gently. It paid for my first apartment after the divorce. Daniel swallowed hard. Scarlett continued softly. But this one never belonged to me anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music drifted softly through the ballroom, while rain continued sliding down the tall windows outside Manhattan's skyline. Daniel looked at her the way people look at sunsets they realized too late they should have appreciated longer. Scarlett. Her name broke slightly in his throat. But she shook her head before he could continue. Not cruelly, just peacefully. Then Adrian appeared beside her again, calm as ever beneath the chandelier glow. He did not interrupt. He simply stood near enough for Scarlett to feel steady. Daniel noticed that too. The respect, the patience, the absence of control. Scarlett looked at Adrian, then back at Daniel one final time. I spent years trying to become enough for someone who only loved what I gave him, she said quietly. I do not need to do that anymore. Daniel closed his hand slowly around the ring, while Scarlett slipped her fingers into Adrian's. Together they walked toward the ballroom exit beneath the golden lights and falling rain beyond the glass. Nobody tried stopping them. And as the doors closed softly behind Scarlett Hayes, Daniel finally understood the cruelest part of losing her. She did not leave angry. She left healed,